and a very warm welcome to Talking Europe. There are less people out of work in the EU today than this time last year. Eurozone unemployment rates are at their lowest level in 5 years. Today we're going to look at the job market in the EU. All good news? Well, no, not exactly. For the last few weeks, we've seen protests in Paris over proposed changes to labour laws, demonstrations in Duisburg calling for job protection in the face of cheap Chinese imports. Europeans clearly do not feel secure about their economic future and their job markets. To tell us if the glass is really half empty or half full, we're joined here in studio by Arne Gernicke, German MEP, Europe Conservatives and Reformists, you sit with here in Brussels. Beside you, we have Virginie Rosière, French MEP with the Socialists and Democrats. And on the other side of the table, we have Mr. Enrique Calvé-Chambon, Spanish MEP, Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, you sit with here in Brussels. And beside you, Jean Lambert, British MEP, Group of the Greens. Ms. Lambert, let me perhaps start with your good self. You come from a non-Eurozone country. It's doing remarkably well. Unemployment at a 10-year low, I believe, down to 5% or that. Do you think overall unemployment, we are out of the woods, that the trend is going in the right direction, if you like?
I don't think we're out of the woods yet at all. I think if you look at the patterns of new employment coming in, quite a lot of that is temporary work. There are a lot of people, even in the UK, working part-time who want to work full-time. And I think there's still a feeling of an uncertainty about investment. And that's, the UK, there are obviously particular reasons for that at the moment. But I think across Europe as a whole, there's still this question about what direction is Europe taking, what sort of investment, plus, and another area is people are now also becoming concerned about whether the new sort of development in digital economy is really going to be good for jobs, or whether we're going to see the next industrial revolution, as it were, and jobs being replaced again by machines.
Indeed, robots taking over. The other good student, of course, at the table is Germany, 4.5% unemployment. Mr. Gernicke, a Eurozone country, and yet doing very well. How do you see the situation, the outlook?
Well, at the moment, of course, if we have a good situation, we always have to see the statistics, what it really means. Is it full employment, or is it a lot of part-time jobs and so on, which really do not help people to survive? And in this case, it's always reading the numbers correctly to really see, is it full employment or really so low unemployment in Germany, as the numbers say. And so this is something one has to prove. And on our side now, of course, we also have to see the numbers coming in regarding the refugees and the work which has to be done now regarding integration. And in this case, numbers can go up again.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because I know
we have to take care about.
In Germany, there has been a law proposed, the integration law, and that would see employers stop giving preference really to German or EU employees for a period of 3 years in order to create more jobs for the new arrivals. How do you feel about that, Mr. Calvé-Chambon?
Well, when we speak about employment and unemployment, and particularly job creation, we are speaking about many different concepts in Europe too. The problem is now, in some countries, really the job creation. In some, I would like to say, areas or European regions, no more than that. For instance, I belong to a circumscription, a constituency that is normally the record of unemployment in Europe, in Spain, with Greece, the south. And so we are very concerned about that. In other countries, like Germany, they are more concerned about the quality of the jobs, the stability of the jobs. In other countries, they are more concerned about the rivalry with immigrants, because immigrants generally they want to go to Germany or to Finland, but they don't want to go. And in other countries, they are also worried about what we call working poor, because that is another aspect of the labor market, is not only to have an occupation, sometimes it's more than an occupation than a job, that has been told, but it's that procures relatively dignity in the life through the salary, and it's not absolutely That could be the idea of the dumping social. So when you pay people not enough to wear a real
dignified life, to have that. Well, we know we're going to look in a few minutes at there were law reforms put in place in Spain back in 2012. We'll check in on how they're going. Similar reforms put up in Italy just last year. It's one of the countries with rampant unemployment, notably among the young. Last year, Prime Minister Matteo Renzi passed a reform called the Jobs Act. Its aim was to encourage employment by making firing staff easier, while at the same time ensuring significant compensation for those laid off. Our correspondents take a look at how the reforms have played out.
Michele is relieved. After working on a temporary contract for 4 years, he's finally got his first permanent contract at this liquor distillery.
Ehi Luisa, è pronta l'essenza per il lampone?
Sì. Hired last December, he oversees the production in the distillery's laboratory. At 31, with a master's degree in quality control, he signed the new contract provided by Italy's Jobs Act.
Before, on a temporary contract, I had no certainty. I didn't know if I had to leave when the contract ended. Now with this permanent contract, I have much better prospects. I can make plans, think about buying a house.
This company hired 3 employees following the Jobs Act. For each one of them, the company will receive a tax rebate of €24,000, spread over 3 years. During that period, the contract can be revoked at any time.
Due to globalisation, production methods have changed. In a company like ours, we need to be able to hire staff when we need them and lay them off when we're in trouble. This new contract gives us that flexibility.
Such flexibility, however, is proving unpopular with social partners.
The Jobs Act is a law that generalises job insecurity because today, even if a young person has a permanent contract, his situation is precarious because his employer can dismiss him at any time. Illegitimate dismissals are now declared legitimate.
For Matteo Renzi, the head of the Italian government, the Jobs Act is a sure win, as he proudly displays in the streets of Rome. Following the implementation of the Act, more than 764,000 permanent contracts have been signed across the country. According to the National Institute of Statistics, in 2015, the average unemployment rate in Italy fell for the first time in 7 years.
Ms. Rosier, France is also trying to push through some labour reforms that echoes a bit what we've seen there in Italy, taking away this idea of job security for life. Will that really create jobs?
Well, I'm not pretty sure that making job suppression easier will encourage job creation. It's kind of a...
Because a lot of employers are saying, you know, they hesitate because once you employ someone in France, they feel like really they employ them for a long, long time and it's hard to get rid of them. So that's
well, it's not particularly hard. You have conditions, but if you want to fire someone, you have also to apply the rules and sometimes pay compensation. But this kind of fairness, you know.
Because we've seen a similar, Mr. Cabechamon, I saw you reacting in that report, but we've seen a similar process put in place back in 2012 in Spain. Critics, however, are saying that it did create more jobs, but only precarious ones.
In Spain, what was really targeted was the fact what we call the internal devaluation. In fact, it was not because the government cannot create very, very few public jobs. It tried simply to make more competitive the Spanish production as a whole. No? About precarity, that is what has been told here. It's very interesting. I think we are not, I don't belong to any party, so I think we are not very sincere with young and people. Precarity is now part of our life, is installed. The all good jobs for life will never exist anymore.
Yes.
We can call it flexibility. Well, we have to tell them this is the truth. I have been myself many times unemployed.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in Ireland we don't have that same mentality of what they call in France a CDI, a job really for an indeterminate amount of time. Does that help? Because in the UK you can get fired overnight.
Well, in the UK, the government has also recently changed the law there so that you can be fired at any point in the first 2 years of employment. After that, obviously, redundancy payments come in and there's a whole process. I'm not sure that extending that from 1 year to 2 years has really helped. We already have a very flexible labour market. But I think that people are getting more and more used to the idea that a job for life is not going to be there, that things do change. And therefore, I think the question for policymakers is, what are you doing to help people in those periods of transition?
Exactly.
Are the benefits adequate? Are the retraining possibilities there? Yeah. What are you doing to actually help people feel supported? And it's much more, this is why there's been such interest in the Scandinavian sort of flexicurity model.
Mr. Gallagher, you mentioned that the idea of not full-time jobs is part, perhaps, of the solution to having very low unemployment rates.
Yes, that is the way I think in Germany this problem, unemployment, is dealt with. That you make part-time jobs and you don't just try and find out what do we need to make a living. And that's of course a very severe question, because if we don't really solve this question, it means that many or some groups of the population are always on the bad side of life. And regarding family, I'm from the family party in Germany, it mostly affects children. If children grow up in poverty, and children are a poverty risk, they already have something put into their biography which makes them lose their perspective. And that then, on the other side, means that they have a bad start into life, and that can be a shadow on their whole biography.
Ms. Lambert, you wanted...
You need to make sure that people are not going to be in poverty one way or another, whether they're working
and
or not,
as you say,
is increasingly important, which is why some countries are now looking at this concept of sort of a universal basic income and so on, been my party policy for years.
This is legitimate, if you consider that, and there are studies saying that the amount of jobs available will decrease because of automation and digital improvements.
Yeah, and we can see that already.
And you can consider that for unqualified jobs, you have a split in the working population. People with low or no qualifications, they stay longer out of the labor market. As on the contrary, people with qualification now can have a job for all their life, and they can move in the labor market more easily.
On age groups
and so
as well.
you've got this part in the labor market, and we have to make sure we can support people who are more in difficulty and precarity, because to
get them out of
this tends to be an increasing movement. And what was said
about
there,
the young generations coming up, and that seems to be a universal sore point across the EU. It's youth unemployment. I mean, out of the EU 28, 20% of youth workers are unemployed. 22% is even higher in the Eurozone, the 19 countries there. In France, it's 25%. In Spain, 47%. What is going on?
It's going on that we have a very difficult productive tissue and educational system. That is what is going on in Spain. And the worst situation is that part of this 47%, they are generally what Madame have said, people without knowledge, without education, without formation, so with an enormous difficulty to find job. Why? Because we have this horrible bubble of the building sector. People abandon the education system very young just to have 3,000 euros a month, just put in bricks one and one another. No?
Okay.
And now they are with nothing. No?
And it's also part of the question, perhaps, mobility of how does that work? Labour mobility across the EU. I mean, we see a lot of young people now moving to the UK because that's where the jobs are. Is that overall the influx of EU workers to the UK, do you see it as a good thing or bad thing? We know it's come up a lot in that EU-UK referendum debate.
Well, from my perspective, it's actually a very good thing. And the UK at the moment has record levels of employment, and that's including, something like 3 million people from outside the UK are also employed. Then there's one of the issues, though, is whether we're actually really using those skills that people bring us, or whether people are working, in jobs for which they're overqualified. So I think this is a challenge for Europe as a whole, is about how we maintain the skills of people's skills, even with mobility.
Absolutely.
May I be provocative, facing some members of the table? These things like social dumping, that or that, are now used probably by some unions. I come from the unions, are used like protectionist barriers to mobility. And that scares me very much.
Ms. Rosier,
Workers' mobility is good when it's wished by workers. And it's not something you tend to because you're forced by the economic condition you're in, or by a company which wants to post you in another country to force matters of social dumping. And in some sectors with low qualification but a need for workforce, for example agriculture, transport or building sector, there you have companies using workforce from other countries to have lower cost of workers, and this is a real problem for local companies in some countries.
I think there are different solutions we can take, and I think there's a political solution, which is the European Youth Employment Initiative.
Indeed,
and
€1 billion handed out last year, but where did it go?
$1 billion into it, and it means that 650,000 people find a job whatsoever. And I think it's better to start your biography with a job and not with unemployment.
Yes.
And that's where the EU.
There's another
Brussels
solution too then, on a member state level. I know that there is a combination of just about 500 companies in Spain, and they, again, on the family sector, they try to build up the job so it comes up to the expectations of the families, the parents. So there's lots of solutions. I think there's not only one way to...
Let's end on that very positive note then, and a message to all employers out there: the happier you keep your employees, the better business will be and the better the economy will work. Thanks indeed to all my guests for having joined us here around the table in the EU Parliament in Brussels. Thanks to you at home for having watched as well. That brings us to the end of this half of Talking Europe.